And Garrett had to decide whether the Dallas Cowboys needed to take a defensive end or a left tackle. With the Cowboys' first-round pick, ultimately Garrett and the Cowboys chose tackle Tyron Smith over J.J. Watt. And Garrett says the decision wasn't really that difficult. Here's his quote. "Certainly that first pick was critical for us. We were fortunate that Tyron Smith was coming out that year. We felt he could be a left tackle and be a cornerstone player for us for a long time. He was a young player who had everything: physical ability, mental makeup. He played at a big school and was productive. We felt if we could get him in here, he could be a great player for us." Smith has become a dominant left tackle and made his first Pro Bowl last season. But Watt is maybe the best defensive player in the NFL right now. So, Stephen A. Smith, did the Cowboys make a mistake passing up on J.J. Watt?
No, they didn't. They didn't make a mistake because obviously, you know, when you talk about a team being productive, one could argue that sometimes the offensive line is more important than the defensive line. I mean, when you look at the kind of offensive line that the Dallas Cowboys that they have right now, with Zach Martin, with Fredericks, with Smith, and others, the fact of the matter is the Dallas Cowboys wouldn't be having the success that they have if it were not for that offensive line. J.J. Watt is big time. There's no question about it. He is as premier as it gets. He is lethal. He is all that in a bag of chips. But the reality is that he was that last year en route to the Houston Texans losing 14 straight games to end the NFL season last year. That's the reality. When you look at an offensive line, any team with an elite offensive line would never go through that. Because when you have an elite offensive line, then the chances are you cannot just throw the ball by protecting your quarterback. You can also run the ball, keeping the ball away from opposing offenses because of ball control. So all of those things are things that are easily facilitated by an offensive line. One could argue that in the sport of football, an offensive line has a far greater impact than a defensive line on far more occasions than people want to realize. So I definitely support Jerry Jones in going the route of Smith as opposed to J.J. Watt, because Smith has proven that he's worth what he's worth as well. It's just that offensive linemen don't get nearly as much notoriety as defensive linemen.
You know, Carrie, I think we have nicknamed the wrong man the Oracle on this show.
Oh.
I think it should now be Stephen A. Smith is from this point forward known as the Oracle.
All right, that's fine with me. I like that name for him.
Yeah, I do too, because he deserves it on his answer that he just gave. And every point was spot on, bullseye. This was a close call. And obviously, Stephen A., I think a lot of football people might disagree with what we are agreeing on at this point. Obviously, I'm a Cowboy fan, but I loved the pick of Tyron Smith. And yet, I'll be the first to admit, I didn't know J.J. Watt at Wisconsin was going to be this J.J. Watt. But it is interesting what you say, and that's a very deep and astute point. You can argue that in this league, given these rules, that maybe the offensive line is slightly more valuable than the defensive line. And J.J. Watt is more of an interior player. He bats down a lot of passes. He's not your classic sack artist. And you made a great point that last year they did go 2-14 with J.J. Watt. They did rank 23rd in defensive efficiency last year with J.J. Watt. And yet Ty Smith very quietly has become the driving force of the Cowboys' most dominating unit, the offensive line. And I know Jerry Jones reached and scared me to death because I don't want any comparisons made yet, or maybe ever, of this group, this Dallas team at 3-1 to those 3 out of 4 Super Bowl teams in the early 90s. But those teams were driven by their offensive line. I've called it the greatest offensive line I've ever seen or covered for sure. I knew all those guys. They were all just raging elephants, and they opened the holes for Emmitt Smith to duck and dart behind. So, to me, Ty Smith is setting the tone for this offensive line because, as you know, he's the premier position, the left tackle. He is a mauler, both as a pass blocker and as a run blocker. And their strength right now and their success is built on that. So just taking nothing away from J.J. Watt. And trust me, from here on, J.J. Watt will be the bigger personality because he has a great personality. He's got his national TV commercial that we just relentlessly see now, where he's at the high school dance or whatever it is. But I'm
Good
pretty
Lord,
sure
he doesn't need to be
Tyron's-
dancing. He might be the worst.
Well, I know.
He might be the worst dancer since Mark Madsen. But go ahead.
You know what? That's a very good point. The Oracle strikes again. I agree with you. But in this case, will Tyron Smith ever have any commercials? I don't think I've ever seen Ty Smith on camera on SportsCenter, just with a sound bite. I don't know. He's anonymous to me, except when he plays left tackle. Then he might just be the star of the Dallas Cowboys so far.
I agree.
All right, gentlemen, let's leave it there. It will be a very wild weekend in the SEC.